Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first meeting of the Etobicoke York Community Council. My name is Councillor Stephen Holliday. I'm the chair of the Etobicoke York Community Council. I'm joined by my colleagues, including the vice chair, Councillor Francis Nunziata. The clerk has confirmed that we have quorum, so I'd like to call meeting 1 to order. Welcome, everyone. Today's meeting is being held with members of council and city staff participating both by video conference and in person at the Etobicoke Civic Center. The Etobicoke Civic Center is open to the public and anyone is welcome to attend the meeting in the council chamber today. The public may continue to participate electronically by video conference. This meeting is also live streaming online at youtube.com/Toronto City Council Live. The clerk's staff have connected remote public speakers to the meeting by video conference, and there are public speakers in the room with us today. The list of speakers can be viewed online by visiting Etobicoke York Community Council page at toronto.ca/council and clicking the speakers box for today's meeting. I ask everyone for their patience with any delays and technical issues. Members, the city clerk has provided all agenda materials on toronto.ca/council and on CMP, the clerk's meeting portal. Clerk's IT staff will be available to members in the chamber and remotely if you need help with your devices. As part of each agenda item, I will ask members to raise their hand or unmute their mic if they wish to question or speak. I will then create a speakers list and I will call on members when it is their turn to speak. When voting on an item or a motion, I ask that members ensure they turn on their video and to raise their hand to indicate their vote. Members, this is a paperless meeting, and I want to remind you that you must still submit and approve your motions by email. Staff are available at etcc@toronto.ca to help with motions. Although we are meeting in different locations and meeting remotely today, the committee would like to acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? If you do have an interest, please raise your hand, and if you're online, unmute your mic and indicate the item number and the nature of the interest. Seeing none. So before we go through the items, I thought, being the first council meeting, we would just take a moment to introduce or reintroduce a number of the key staff members that are joining us online. So first I would, of course, acknowledge the clerk, Nancy Martin. From planning, we have Michael Mitzi. From transportation, Lorna Zapponi. Online today, we have Sandra Burrows from Toronto Building. And I believe online we also have Max Dita from Parks, Forestry, and Recreation. There's Max. If there's anyone else I've missed, please say so. Michael, why don't you go ahead?
Mr. Chair, in the room here with us today are 3 people from City Planning. Allison Reed, our Manager of Urban Design. Ali Magani, who's the planner on the only city planning item before us today. And Elizabeth Silva Stewart, who is our Manager for the Central Section.
Thank you, and welcome back to the staff to this council chamber. Okay, we will now go through the items. Bear with me for a moment. Item EY 1.1 is 4340 Bloor Street West, zoning bylaw amendment application, request for direction report. I'll hold that in my name because I know that there are speakers registered. Item EY 1.2, 3 Sonoma Way, application to remove a private tree. Nancy, I'll just check with you. Is that timed or may we dispose of that right now? Okay, so Councillor Crisanti?
Mr. Chair, I did have a question before I moved it. You want to hold it, or can we do it now?
I think I think we can, we can deal with it right now. I think it'd be pretty straightforward.
It is straightforward. I just want to know if the applicant was notified of this meeting. Did the applicant, was the applicant aware that today's a meeting for this issue?
Yes, I can confirm that the clerk sent out notice again because the item had been deferred from a while back ago, so we did send out notice.
Okay, so I just, for the record, I just want to say that I made a couple of attempts to meet with the constituent over this past weekend, given the short notice and the short time I've been around, and I got no response. I also called the constituent, and I got no response there as well. So, I'm just going to assume that this is not critical to them at this point, or they would have been here, or at least called me back. So I'm going to move staff recommendation at this point in time. Before we vote on that, should they need to come back at another time, is there that 1 year time frame that applies here, or can they come back anytime?
I will allow Parks, Forestry, and Rec to answer that question, how they would reassess the application.
If it needs to be reassessed, yes.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I may, this is Max Dida.
Max.
This application have been reviewed by staff and go through the process according to the bylaw, as you can see in the staff report. So if the decision is made today, let's say to support the staff proposal for denying, they have a right to apply again, but we cannot consider this application. This will be the final decision from the committee council.
Sorry, Max, I just heard that they have the right to apply again. Is that correct?
They can apply again for sure if they want to.
Okay, I just want to make sure that they could. All right, then on that basis, I'll move to approve staff recommendation that we have in front of us.
Councillor Crisanti moves the staff recommendations on EY 1.2, which are up on the screen. All those in favor? Any opposed? That item is carried. Okay, we'll go back to the top of the order paper. We've got EY 1.1, 4340 Bloor Street West zoning bylaw amendment application, request for direction. And we do have speakers on this item. I will call Kevin Krieger from the Mark Glenwood Homeowners Association as the first speaker.
He's online.
Kevin's online. Just looking over to the clerks just to ensure we've got a connection.
Kevin Krieger, and I'm the co-president of the Mark Glenwood Homeowners Association.
Good morning, Mr. Krieger.
I've been a lifelong resident. Oh, can you hear me?
I can, and I just wanted to say good morning and welcome to the meeting. You've got 5 minutes to speak to us.
Thank you so much. As I mentioned, my name is Kevin Krieger. I'm the co-president of the Mark Glenwood Homeowners Association. I've been a lifelong resident and homeowner in Mark Glenwood, and I'm here today to speak specifically to the proposal for 4340 and give some context as to our community and association. It's important to understand a couple of key items. Markland is a master plan community of largely single-family homes with a number of apartment buildings developed with the tower in the park philosophy. So we do have a number of apartments in the community that have expansive green space around them. I'm here to speak on behalf of the association and my fellow residents, and also highlight to you that as a community, we certainly are not anti-development. We recently worked collaboratively with the developer for another comparable site in the neighborhood and worked through a number of sort of key planning items and ultimately ended up with a development that certainly fits into the context of the community and is one that we actually supported in communication with council. The item I'm here to speak specifically about on the development at 4340 Bloor is really its connection to Mill Road. As a community, Mill Road and Bloor is the center point of our neighborhood. and really is key to the overall feel of community. With the street bordered effectively by exclusively single-family homes, the massing that's proposed on Mill Road is not at all reflective of the overall look and feel of our community, and certainly would be a blight on the street. One of the things that we have proposed to the developer is looking at something that certainly has less intensification as it relates to its connection to Mill Road, is reflective of the setbacks that are common all along the street, and also ideally would sort of create some animation at street level that's consistent with the balance of development along the street. With it being located next to a school and also at a very high traffic location, large massing certainly changes not only the look and feel, but also presents a number of safety concerns. A number of residents from the community are here certainly to speak to more specific detail. But one important element to note is this is not a community of NIMBYs. We certainly respect that housing is in short supply throughout the city of Toronto. We recognize that with the availability of developable land in our community, the likelihood of intensification is very real and also very reasonable. We just want to ensure that the development is reflective of the overall community, doesn't change the nature of our community, is reflective of the transit options and opportunities that exist there, and ultimately builds and continues to foster on the incredible community that we have such a great privilege in living in. So we certainly would ask that you review the Mill Road massing and look to something that better reflects the overall look and feel of the community and provides safe sightlines, considering its proximity to obviously both the main commercial center of our neighborhood and also one of our key local schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Krieger. If it's okay, I'd like to ask a question of you, just for the benefit of my colleagues. A lot of what you told us today focuses on the Mill Road building, and for the benefit of my colleagues, maybe you can confirm this, but there's two buildings in this proposal. One very large building that is close to the existing tower on the site, and then there's a smaller building on the Mill Road side, and it's very different because Mill Road is populated by houses, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about Mill Road for the benefit of my colleagues that have never been there.
Definitely. So Mill Road is exclusively a street of single-family homes, other than Millwood, which is the elementary school in the neighborhood, also very low-rise in nature. Basically, the setback is uniform as you travel from Bloor Street all the way up to the top end of Markland. And on both sides, effectively, is single-family homes with substantial setbacks from the street. The proposal obviously is for what may not seem in the grand scheme of things a large massing, but certainly in relation to the balance of our community is. And based on its proximity to street level and its direct center point in our community, that is the area of development that's most concerning.
Thank you very much for speaking to us today.
Thank you.
Okay, our second speaker is Mr. John Campbell, representing the Markland Wood Homeowners Association. Good morning, Mr. Campbell.
Good morning.
Welcome to the chamber, no stranger, and as you know, you've got 5 minutes.
Good morning, friends, and congratulations on your re-elections and your elections. A little over a year ago, I was asked to assist with the Markland Woods Homeowners Association. I was familiar with the area from having been a school trustee representing the area for 7 years. And this is an area of predominantly families, and one of the first things that struck me about this development was that it's not really welcoming to enough families. So the development calls for over 241 units, of which less than 10% will be 3-bedroom units. So although it meets the growing up guidelines in terms of 2 and 3 bedroom units, you can't really raise a family of 2 children or more in 2 bedroom units. And so I know it meets the minimum 10%, I would say, to planning. Planning thinks that that's fine. I think it's around 9%. But this is not an area of the city that's particularly well served by transit. And so most people will be getting around by cars. It's not going to attract the same clientele that would be found either down at Park Lawn and Lakeshore or in the downtown core. It's a neighborhood of families. And so I think to accommodate families, husband and wife and a couple of children, it needs more than just 23 units. It needs more than the bare minimum. I mean, I would love to see this development have 35 or 40 3-bedroom units. In the context of the local schools, there are 3 public schools, a Catholic school and a private school in the area. They're all within walking distance, and the TDSB schools are all under enrollment. The junior middle school is actually 30% under enrolled. So there's lots of capacity for more kids to be going to the local schools. Ms. Martins, I had a handout as well. So in the preliminary report, staff offered comments. It's called a detailed revision list, and I've made copies of a couple of things that I would like to highlight. One was in regard to the small number of 3-bedroom units, which was commented on by staff. The other is in the size of the units. The units have been found to be just too small for 2-bedroom units and for 3-bedroom units. So those are staff comments, and I hope staff follows through with the applicant in pushing for larger units and pushing for more of those 3-bedroom units. So I think that's the extent of what I would like to say about this. I think it needs to be, it's in a neighborhood of families. I think it needs to be more accommodating to families. And then in closing, the last thing I would say is that the previous Etobicoke York Community Council gave direction for a public meeting. And there's never been a public meeting. And so I heard Mike Cole last week say how he had 95 developments and many of them have gone to the Ontario Land Tribunal. And this has gone to the Ontario Land Tribunal. But I think that the local residents need to hear about this application because other than a sign on a lawn, they haven't seen anything of it. So I would definitely encourage a public meeting. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Are there any questions of the speaker? Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is, and I'll just confirm to you that the clerk did pass out the handouts. The next speaker is Peter Derry from the Markland Wood Homeowners Association. Good morning, Mr. Derry. Welcome.
Morning.
Welcome to the Community Council. You've got 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. Morning, councilors. As has been stated, my name is Peter Derry. I'm a longtime resident of Markland Wood. I won't tell me how many years, but it's a long time. And I live within 200 meters of the suspect, that's not the right word, intersection, Bloor and Mill Road. The topic I want to address specifically is one of safety. In order to do that, I have to give some background information in the form of numbers. I know they can all put us to sleep, but they're required here. Firstly, the matter of students. There are 4 schools within a kilometer. And the kilometer is the outer distance, that's Bloordale. Silverthorne, up the road, the high school, a moment to say about that, is 900 meters. You know the location of Millwood Junior School abuts this property, and St. Clement's is 75 meters away on the opposite corner. In those 4 schools, there are more than 2,260 students. Please keep that number in mind. The proposal before you, with respect to occupancy, currently there are 86 units. It's proposed to add 241. That translates to a 280% increase. With respect to parking spots, the current building allows for 95. The new proposal, I thought we were trying to move away from cars only. The new proposal allows for 386 spaces. That translates to an increase of 306%. I'll try and move on. With respect to the building structure, It's important to note, you've heard about setbacks. A word on setbacks on Mill Road. You've heard about the housing structures. The average setback of the house, a house on Mill Road to the street is 60 meters. Wait a minute, I had the number here. It's 60 feet. The house, the current development is 42 feet closer, distance-wise. That's a difference of 18 feet closer to that sidewalk. Now, as well, the structure, as it's currently proposed, intrudes on the corner. And this is where the safety issue comes into effect. I hope none of you have had to drive along Bloor Street recently because it's been turned into a drag strip. And that has increased over the years the number of accidents. I have personally been aware of several accidents in my over 40 years in the neighborhood. I wanted to look at some police statistics, and they are as follows. And we're looking at the 3 intersections involved. We've got Markland West by the golf course. We've got Markland East, St. Clement's Church, and this one, Bloor Mill Road. Now, these numbers are quite staggering. Markland West, in the period since 2014, has had 37 motor vehicle accidents. By the church, it increases to 57. This particular intersection, Bloor Mill Road, has experienced 81 accidents in that time frame. And what does that mean? Why is that happening? I think the only conclusion you could draw is the 4 schools that feed that intersection. I don't want to play to the words feed, but students from all those schools like to attend what I'll call the draw, the plaza. Think back when you were a teenager, how often you went for a slice of pizza or McDonald's. All of those things are right in that plaza. Those students, most of them except St. Clements, will cross north to south. The vision of the drivers to see them, particularly coming from the east, is obstructed by the current proposal. That's of serious concern. Now, we put all this information together, the 280% increase in units, the 306 parking, the number of vehicles that are increased by this new structure. I draw this conclusion to you, but before I do, I'm conscientious of the time. Before I do, I can't help but point out that I have a major concern. Whenever these issues have been raised in the past, I've been told that planning only considers the unit in question. Planning, to my perspective, should include a surrounding area. We have these numbers in the space of 500 meters. 240 has 234 new units that's under development now. 210 is proposed, and it has 564 units. This one has 241. That's 1,045 units within a kilometer. That's wrong. And that will do nothing but encourage accidents, serious ones, including fatalities. I wouldn't want that on my shoulders. So, to conclude, I talked about safety. It's not safety in numbers. That doesn't display here or bear out here. In fact, it should be safety first, and that should be the clarion call here. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Derry. Are there any questions of the speaker? Seeing none, I will ask the next speaker, Mr. Richard Honig from the Markland Wood Homeowners Association.
Good morning,
Good morning.
councillors and staff. I've listened to the presentations of Kevin, John, and Peter, and I'd like to reiterate a little bit of detail about those. One of the things I'd like to reiterate is the mention of a community meeting. In the May 17th, 21 council meeting, a motion forwarded by Stephen Holliday, and it's EY 24-11, directed staff to schedule a community consultation meeting for application located at 4340 Bloor Street West, together with the ward councillor. That's now Stephen. I would like to see that happen, and especially before the OLT meeting, with sufficient time for the community to hear the results of this. We have already heard from Kevin about the streetscape, which is terrible, because we talk in buildings only about stories of build. We don't talk about the mechanical penthouse. Now we are facing a residential street with a 1.5-story mechanical penthouse on top of a 4-story apartment building. So don't talk about a structure of stories unless you look at the height and that. And the mechanical penthouse, just a slab on top to handle all the air conditioning and whatever elevators and that, does not have to encompass the whole building. That whole east building is covered by a mechanical penthouse of great 1.5-story height. I mean, it doesn't go from edge to edge, but it's there. So that is part of the presentation. I have copies for the councillors to have a look at. One of the ones was for the successful building on 240. And that building shows an apartment building, and it shows a 3-story apartment building, well, with good setback from the road, and very familiar and in line with the whole residential area around it. It is 3 stories high, and it has amenity space on top for the residents. I'm not proposing that building, but showing a building that is in line with the community and with the development at 240 that is roughly 200% increase in density. And if you look at the 4340 development without considering the east building, if you said, oh, we want some green space, we want somewhere for the rainwater to be absorbed by grass, greenscape, then you would eliminate that building, and the 182 units that are in the west building would be 212% increase of the 86 apartments that are in there now. Now, you would say, oh, okay, that sounds reasonable, 200%, and we feel that would be reasonable too. But I think that the west building meets a lot of the concerns of the Toronto TLC and the school and the safety. It has reduced the original building to go down from 6 stories to 4, and as far as wind conditions and shadows and all that, it has done safety for the kids in the school on the playground. So that was good. The tower there has been decreased from 16 to 13. And that's having shadow effects and everything on the park, on the forest, and on the school. So that has been a great improvement by Hazelview. I just hope that the 13 stories don't get classified as tower instead of mid-rise, and that it stays at those 13 stories, because it should be 12 stories to be considered, I would say, into a neighborhood and a community of this size with 2 schools bordering it. This is a specific development, 4340, which has 2 schools, a plaza, and all kinds of traffic going from there. Now, the Catholic school, it has only the staff parking lot that goes out into the street. The drop-off area is on a side residential street that doesn't incur traffic. The Millwood School, both schools have daycares in them. The Millwood School, which is a French immersion school.
Mr. Honig, I have to just remind you to wrap up shortly. Thank you.
Okay. It is in a traffic street, Millwood. I have watched the pickup time, because the drop-off time, the cars vary. They pass past the boundary of the present apartment building, parking cars all the way there past the safety crosswalk that goes off Toledo Road to Millwood School. Buses are there, cars are there, buses are turning around on the street, cars are doing the same thing. It's a real traffic mess. That is the worst time period on Mill Road.
Thank you, Mr. Honig.
Okay.
I'm going to pass the chair to my colleague, Councillor Nunziata. I did want to ask you a question or two.
Councillor Holiday, question?
Thank you. Mr. Honig, you said something that was important. I wanted to make sure that my colleagues understood. This application started out as a very large building on the west side. There's two, as a reminder, there's a west and an east side, and the east side is closest to Mill Road. That's been the subject of the deputations. Did I describe that correctly?
That's right.
The applicant has changed it in their second submission to what you described as 13 stories.
Right.
So the comments that you've provided today, and I suspect your colleagues from the Homeowners Association have been with the understanding that the building is 13 stories on the west side. In other words, you focused your eyes on that Mill Road building.
Right.
Okay, and so that's the takeaway, that, you know, the second submission is much different than the first, and that means that you get into the details on that second building.
That's right.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions?
Sorry if this is a silly question.
Chair back, Councillor Morley.
Thank you, Councillor Holiday. But just so I understand the context, you handed around the 240 Markland Drive renderings to us as a better example of what you would like to see in the community. Is that right?
Partially. It's 3-level and it blends with the community. No, my first concern would be to agree with Kevin, but to state that we are proposing in our meetings with Hazelview a development of townhouses to replace those 3-story high. And we will be talking about the amenities, because that building is separate from the other 2 buildings and has none of that kind of stuff. So those residents have to get into the 4th, 5th, 6th floor of the west building to get to anything. And they have none of those in that building. And on top of the roof, instead of the 1.5-story mechanical building, they would have some space that building would have for the residents in that building.
Right. Makes sense. Thank you so much for the clarification.
Thank you, Councillor Morley. Are there any other questions? Seeing none. Oh, Councillor Crisanti.
So, Mr. Chair, I think this question is, I'm not sure who it's going to go to. You mentioned there's was a first submission and the second submission. What's the difference between the first and this one? How much does it differ in terms of what we currently have in front of us? I gather there was more density.
Okay.
But
the first one was over 300% increase in density. It had 308 apartment units included in it, a 16-story tower and the 4-story on Mill Road. In the new submission, they basically changed the west tower for most of the decrease. There was a slight decrease in the number of apartments in the east building, and they also changed the height. The west building has 2 podiums that form a circle like a C around the present building there that is 15 stories high. Now, an equal height between the 2 buildings, the one that's presently there and the west building, would the same height would be 14 floors in the west building to the 15th floor level of the present building. Both buildings then have a mechanical structure of 5 or 6 meters on top of it. Now, and the north podium facing on the west building, we're talking now, the north podium facing the school and that was 6 stories high, and under discussions I'm sure that Hazelview had with TLC on that building, they finally, for the shadow and the wind and all these different things, they both decreased the size or the width of the tower and the height of it, where it expanded over the Millwood School. They drew it back to be narrower and only took it up 13 stories. And they took the 2 stories from the building or podium at the bottom that was closest to the school, and they moved the 2 stories from the 6. There were 6 on the south side facing Bloor. They moved some of that to 8 stories high. So they made changes. They made setback changes. They made cascading changes on the west building so that it fit in and handled wind, pedestrian, walkability, all those kind of factors. The west building addressed those. The east building did some changes. It had a few less apartments in it, but the number was still 241, 280%. If you eliminated the east building, and we're not proposing that it get eliminated, we would like townhouses that are 3 stories high. And, you know, that's
You
our...
just described that a number of changes were made so this design could fit in better with the current community that's there.
That's right.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Honig. We have one more speaker, John Ferracuti, registered. I'm going to take it John is either remote or...
He is ill, Mr. Holiday.
Thank you, Mr. Derry. Unfortunately, Mr. Ferracuti can't join us. So with that, are there any other speakers? Okay, we'll take this into committee. First is questions of staff. Councillor Nunziata, please go ahead.
A question to staff. As far as the community consultation meeting, so the preliminary report came to Community Council in May 2021. So I guess my question is, from May, was there not a date scheduled to have that community meeting? I realized we were during the election, but that was in August, right?
Yeah, through the chair. The preliminary report was written. It's dated May 2021. And you're correct. The second submission, which is subject of this report, was April 2022. And in that intervening year, a community consultation meeting was not scheduled. I can't say specifically why. The file was going through change, and we were expecting a reduced proposal over time. But once April 2022 came, we were venturing into the last community councils of last year and into the summer and election recess. At the same time, the appeal became active with the OLT, and a case management conference session had occurred, which once that happens, it does force our hand to provide to get some direction from council on how to handle the file. But to make a long answer short, no, there was no community consultation meeting here.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Perruzza.
Oh, okay, there we go. All right. So this whole business now of the, every applicant out there being able to go to the tribunal after 90 days, and basically, given that the sort of the provincial rules are changing by the day in terms of what's permitted, density, all these other kinds of things. The provincial government is really cutting us out of the process. And by their cutting us out of the planning process, do you find that we are just simply going there to these planning conferences and just being told what to accept, and we're really giving up? We're not going there with any kind of how do you say, sort of having thought about the application in any meaningful way, and and we just sort of, we take, back whatever we're basically told to accept. And I'm just wondering, in this process, is it really worth us having a sort of a planning response to these applications, given that our planning positions basically aren't really sort of considered by the tribunal? Like other than sending lawyers there to write up a deal that they basically offer us, what else are we doing there?
Through you, Mr. Chair. You have a lot in your question there, Council.
Well, not really. It all adds up. It all adds up to the same thing. Is it?
Yeah.
And really, the question is, we no longer have a planning role in planning. So why have planners? Why don't we just have send down lawyers and try to get the best deal you can get?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll try and scope your question down to an answer I can provide. I think our efforts to mitigate and deal with all applications is in fact very worthwhile. We are dealing with quite a volume load. In Etobicoke, York, we have over 550 active applications. And yes, a significant number of them do end up being appealed to the OLT. It doesn't mean the outcome that comes out of that OLT matter isn't something that is not supportable. We report out on every file, or legal does for us, depending on the timing, and seeking council direction. We do put thought into what is the right recommendation we want to make to committee and council, and what would best serve the community in terms of our response to that application. A great deal of the OLT hearings end up being settled. We work with the applicant under the framework of case management structure up there. And we often get proposals that are quite satisfactory. And we bring, as you know, Councillor, a lot of in-camera settlement reports to council. So I think the work we're doing to address these under these circumstances is very worthwhile overall for the community and for the planning department, for council.
So let me take a slightly different tack then, okay? Applicant goes to the tribunal with their application. After 90 days, or any number of days after 90 days, they appeal their application to the tribunal. We have deemed that application complete, i.e., we've basically said all the requisite studies and reports accompany the right number of plans in the right form and folded the right way, okay? So they come in with their plans, folded in the right dimensions, with all of their stuff. They submit over the counter here at planning this big application, and then we don't even have time, in a couple of mine, for example, we haven't even had time to basically bring forward a report here saying let's hold down, let's set it aside for a community meeting, and they basically go to the and they now file this stack of paper with us, and then they take the same stack of paper and file it with the Ontario Land Tribunal. Our planning department, as you say, there is a question coming up. So our planning department, as you say, we have hundreds of similar kinds of applications, same size. So the application gets circulated here internally to, and please correct me if any step of this process, if I'm getting it wrong, okay? So we circulate it to all of our departments for comment back. At the same time, these folks have now gone to the Ontario Land Tribunal. We get the comments back.
Question, Councillor.
Yeah, basically, it's my initial question is this, that while the response was, yeah, we play a role, we basically play a role in going down to the Ontario Land Tribunal, basically accepting all of the documentation that have been filed by the applicant, not really being able to challenge any of that, cutting communities and residents out of the planning process because their opinions doesn't mean anything, because in those instances doesn't even get registered properly if you don't have the right sort of type of meeting. Goes to the Ontario Land Tribunal.
Counselor,
The Land Tribunal
gotta ask
in
it.
a pre-planning conference tells us, this is all good with us. Are you guys good with it? And we basically sit on the other side and say, yeah, I guess we're good with it if you're going to tell us we're good with it, because we really haven't done a heck of a lot of work with it. And we just simply accept the developments that those folks foist on us
Thank you,
on the
Councillor
basis of
Ruiz.
the application. And what role do we have in the planning department, in the planning process? What role is there for us in that planning process?
There it is. That was your last question.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Mintz.
Briefly, the clock starts ticking after an application is deemed complete. But perhaps a bit surprising, very few applicants appeal their application at the time frame that they are allowed to by current legislation. It's in their best interests to go to if they're going to go to the OLT, to understand the issues and to have feedback from city planning on what works and doesn't work from how we see it with their application. And so they often do wait for at least a preliminary report and or one or two circulations of the files before they make a determination whether they think they're better off going to the OLT. The vast majority of applications do not end up at the OLT. We bring final reports to committee and council, or we end up settling before the OLT renders a decision on the file. So I wouldn't describe the circumstances as application comes in and immediate appeal occurs. That's actually relatively rare.
Thank you. Councillor Morley.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I have a question for city planning. And just to share my thoughts and what I've taken away from this morning's proceedings so far on this issue is that what we've heard from residents who've presented is there have been changes to the proposal that are reflective of the concerns of the community, including some setback issues and some density issues. And that is, to me, very encouraging that the process is playing out in some beneficial ways to the community. My question is, can you, for our benefit here, reiterate to us the recommendation before us, and I propose next steps to move this forward.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The report before the committee today is actually recommends opposition to this application. The report is not saying we support the application at this time. However, the report does speak to and provide some thought to where we're going. There are issues that remain outstanding, and between now and the hearing, which is scheduled, it has been scheduled for June of 2023. In our world, that's still a lot of time to work out the issues. We have every belief that the applicant will continue to work with us up until that point to whittle down the issues. Inputs from, for instance, the community today, your direction as a committee will help frame ongoing discussion with the applicant.
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up question, if I may. You mentioned, and we heard previously, that there was a recommendation from this council to host a community meeting. There's further, as you state, conversations happening later in the coming months. Is there an intention, or should we expect or encourage or recommend an opportunity in advance of that June 2023 review of this, that a community consultation take place before then?
Through the chair, this report isn't recommending a community consultation meeting, but if your committee requests or directs us to have such a meeting, we are, of course, will. And at this stage, it still would provide some input in terms of how we deal with this application, all the way up to the day the hearing starts.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morley. Are there any other questions from the committee? Okay, I'm gonna, in the meantime, I'll pass the chair to the vice chair, and I'm gonna ask a
Councillor Holiday, questions to staff.
question or two of staff.
Sorry, Deputant, sir, yeah. Yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah, just our procedures don't allow that. I'm sorry. Our procedures don't allow to address the chair. I'm sorry.
No, sorry. Okay, Councillor Holiday, questions to staff.
Mr. Mizzi, yeah, I wanted just to confirm what you said very helpfully through the questions of my colleagues. So this is before the tribunal. The current staff recommendation, the staff recommendation before us is to refuse the application and to continue discussions. So in other words, there are still things that need to be worked upon. Is that a fair, very plain summary of where we're at right now in the process?
To you, Mr. Chair, yes.
Now, the speakers have come forward from the community. They're an association, and they've delivered a bunch of messages today. And a lot of them focus on the Mill Road building, but in your view, is anything fatal in what they've said or outlandish? I mean, these are things that are materials that can be discussed. Is that a fair summary, a plain summary?
To you, Mr. Chair, I think the issues raised today are absolutely matters we can continue to discuss with the applicant. I think it's probably fair to publicly say we put out to some degree a position on what we feel in terms of what we might be able to support from a density or land use point of view. I mean, the lands are apartment, residential apartment lands, and I think we make it relatively clear in the report that we're comfortable with this general scale at this point, but there are matters to work out. For example, issue was raised about mechanical penthouse. Certainly that eastern apartment component has a very significant mechanical penthouse that runs the length of Mill. We absolutely want to look at that and see if we can improve that situation as an example. So,
okay, and so the two possible outcomes are between you and the applicant. You may find an agreeable set of grounds, and that would come back to council to accept or not accept, or it goes all the way the other way and it goes through the tribunal process and they decide.
yeah, I think that, Mr. Chair, that's fair way to frame it. Yeah.
Okay, and then you spoke about the timing, because I think the community has come forward with a lot of questions about, why wasn't there a community meeting? And a lot of that has to do with, I think as you put, this was an application in movement, and then I think it was fixed in April 2022 is when the version that's before us was last seen, is that correct?
Yes,
Okay.
this report's speaking to a February 2022 submission.
And you've got to get it now before council because that was appealed earlier this year and council needs to stake a position on it and give direction to the solicitor on what to do at the tribunal.
Yes, Mr. Chair. In fact, Etobicoke York Community Council Solicitor Gabe Zobel is here. I'm not sure if Sarah Amini, who is the solicitor on this file, is here. But we've brought this report at this stage because of the next milestones associated with the OLT hearing, and we have to have some direction to go back to the OLT.
Okay, and my final question is, as you mentioned, you were able to host a community meeting. It may be a little different than a traditional meeting because this is now at the OLT, but that's definitely something staff can deliver.
To you, Mr. Chair, of course, yes.
Thank you so much. Those were all my questions.
Thank you. Are there any further questions to staff? Councillor Crescenti.
So I will ask staff, how are discussions progressing with the applicant since the date of this report? It looks like this was written on November the 8th. To date, have they been progressing? Have there been meetings since then, particularly on the issue of transportation impact and servicing report?
To you, Mr. Chair, I myself have not talked to the applicant on this file. I think way I would probably describe it is we had signaled we would report out to this committee, and discussions are quiet at the moment pending what comes out of today's decision related to this file, and then we'll pick up conversation with this applicant. I'm under the impression, or I'm not under the impression, that they're not willing to continue to talk. I think we will have further discussion.
That was my concern. So they are willing, everyone's willing to sit at the table and continue negotiations, discussions to come to an agreement.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that's my impression. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor
Okay.
Crescenti.
Thank you. So we'll now go to speakers. Councillor Holiday to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have two motions, if I could have them presented, please. As they go up, I'll paraphrase. The City Council to direct that the City Solicitor and the Director of Community Planning to continue discussions with the applicant in consultation with the local councillor in order to identify improvements to the massing and the position of the east building facing Mill Road, including the setbacks, the height, the street facade, and to increase the ratio of 3-bedroom units. Second motion shouldn't be any surprise to my colleagues, and that is that City Council direct that City Planning host a community information meeting regarding this application. I'll start out by thanking the Markland Wood Homeowners Association, who are no strangers to visiting us at Community Council, for taking a very, very sophisticated and optimistic approach to this development. So it wasn't no, it was let's work on this. Let's make this something that makes sense to the community. And it is one of those classic trying to fit in additional development on Tower in the Park lands, of which there is quite a bit of in the Markland Wood community and in central Etobicoke in general. So these are really important to the community. I think the speakers today also described really well about what's at stake. 4 schools, all within the vicinity of this development, one literally next door and, you know, affected by shadow, wind conditions, the massing of the buildings, but also Mill Road. Mill Road is a beautiful residential street. And you drive down it, there are nicely set back houses that are very uniform in nature. There's a school as you approach the end towards Bloor Street that is also set back, and then there's the site of this development. And I think what you are hearing from the community is an appreciation that this overall development has changed in a way that is very helpful, but there's still work to be done, and they have laser focus on the Mill Road building. And hence the rationale for my application. You know, I think there's still more to talk about, and I've tried to lay that out. And you know, I hope that the planning department, the solicitor, can keep me involved, and hence the community involved, or the community's voice involved, which would be myself, because I think, you know, there is a solution to be found. And I would just finally conclude to say I look forward to a community meeting, and that'll be a chance to get out this information on a larger scale to the community, and get folks re-involved in the planning process. Even though this is at the tribunal, there's still an opportunity to get people involved in this, to learn about the details, to learn about this process, to learn about the nuts and bolts of the application, and restore a bit of confidence in the overall system and how it works. So with that, I will thank the planning department for an enormous amount of work over a couple of years in this application, and for all of the people that have put their heart and soul into trying to make it a more improved application and a positive building block to our community. I hope you'll support my motions.
Thank you. Do we have any questions to Councillor Holiday on his motion? Any clarification? Councillor Crisante.
On the community consultation part, Mr. Chair, are you putting a timeline on it as to when you expect that would happen?
It's my expectation that staff would work with me and without writing it directly in the motion, I think we need to do that as soon as possible because time is of the essence, seeing that this is at the OLT. So I'm available and we'll make it happen.
Okay, any further questions? Okay, I'll pass the chair back to Councillor Holliday.
Thank you. Just confirming no other further speakers on this item. Councillor Nunziata.
Just briefly, I do support the Councillor Holliday's motion, and I think it's very important that we do have an information meeting prior to the hearing. And as we heard from Mike Mitzi as well, is that it's his understanding that the applicant is willing to sit down and speak to staff and speak to the community. So I think that's very important. So I do support that. It's unfortunate, the timeline going through an election and not able to have that community meeting and then the appeal happen at the same time. So I do support the councillor's motion.
Any other speakers? With that, we can get the motion on the screen. All those in favor of the amendments? And that is carried. All those in favor of the item, all those in favor of the item as amended? And that carries. And that's unanimous. I will ask Councillor Morley if you could present the bills when they come up on the screen. It's okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that Bill 11, prepared for the November 28th, 2022 meeting 1 of the Etobicoke York Community Council, be declared as a bylaw and passed subject to Section 226.9 of the City of Toronto Act 2006.
All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Check with the
Motion to adjourn.
check with the clerk. Yep. Councillor Morley, if you could take care of that, if you agree.
My pleasure. That confirmatory bills to confirm the legislative proceedings of the Etobicoke York Community Council acting under delegated authority at meeting 1 on November 28th, 2022 be declared as bylaws and passed subject to Section 226.9 of the City of Toronto Act 2006.
All those in favor? Any opposed? That item carries. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Crisani. All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you.